Got to bring in Fox NBA analyst Slick Ric Bucher, but Acho. Should super teams be a knock on LeBron's legacy?
They shouldn't, but they will. And the reason that they will is because we just live in a lazy society, a society that just reads the headlines and doesn't like to read the article. The headlines will say LeBron James had to form super teams to win. But the article will tell you about the economy of the time, which forced LeBron James to form super teams in order to win. The headline might tell you that Matt Ryan passed for more yards than John Elway. But the article will tell you that back in those days of playing ball, the passing game was not nearly as prolific around. The headline will not tell you that LeBron James had to create a super team because a super team, the Boston Celtics, existed before him. The headline will tell you LeBron James had to form a super team, and the Lakers, because the likes of the Warriors and the likes of the Brooklyn Nets formed super teams before him. LeBron James' super team creation has always been reactive, not proactive. LeBron James didn't jump into the league looking for super teams. There were no super teams then. You had the Phoenix Suns playing great back in the 04s. You had the Dallas Mavericks playing great. On the other side, you had the Pistons playing great. The Lakers tried and failed one year, forming a super team with the aging Karl Malone and the aging Gary Payton. But LeBron James didn't have to go against super teams, thus he did not need a super team. That was not the economy then. But the NBA's economy right around 2007 changed into forming super teams. LeBron James didn't at first. He said, it's all good. I'm going to keep doing it my way. But then he started to read the articles. And the article said, super teams are on the horizon. And if you want to win, you must form a super team. So like the wise, cognitive individual, but the wiser and cognitive basketball player that LeBron James is, he said, you know what? It's time to go ahead and form a super team. So he should not get knocked for forming super teams, but he will.
I'm not going to argue with any of that, Acho eloquently said, except that don't just read the article or a article, read articles. Definitely don't just read the headline, but read multiple sources. And to your point, I am not going to knock him because he built super teams, but I'm also not going to give him extra credit as a player in and of himself because he learned to game the system. And that's what he ultimately did. He went to 4 different teams, and he got them to utilize all their resources in order to build a team specifically to take advantage of his particular skill set and strengths. And then the second that team started to fall off, he moved to the next team. What do we often, when we most often compare LeBron and Michael Jordan, and if we are giving LeBron credit for being greater than Michael Jordan, it's generally because he went to 10 NBA finals, and Michael only went to 6. 6 for 6, 4 for 10, but come on, 10 NBA finals. That's extraordinary in today's era by anyone. But he could not have done that if he had stayed in one place. And so I don't see that as a reflection of his greatness. And I don't take away anything, the fact that he's utilized gathering great players in order to chase championships. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I also am not going to connect that with his individual greatness as a player, whether it's a businessman, a GM, whatever you want, a visionary. I'll give him credit for that, but not when it comes to comparing the two as players.
Oh, my goodness. This should not be a knock on LeBron's legacy. It will not be a knock on LeBron's legacy as long as I have a voice, a microphone, and an opinion. Let me tell you why. Every team has been a super team that's been in contention, minus the Dallas Mavericks that year. Every team, basically. And I'm going to give you some facts to support that. If you ain't got a super team, you ain't got a super chance of winning a championship. Let's be real. It's just about who gets the credit. So in modern NBA times, we're saying it's super team because it's about a player. But back in the days, it was about a general manager, so we didn't call it anything. Just a man going to work doing a 9-to-5 called general manager duties. But let's talk about the 1971 Lakers or the 1972 Lakers that had a combined 28 and 29 all NBA appearances on their team. 28 and 29. You know how many LeBron James had on his team last year when they won the championship? 27. Anybody? Anybody? Okay, it got quiet right there. Fewer all NBA appearances on their team. Let's talk about the Lakers in the 80s. Showtime, that had 5 different players selected to All-Star games and 7 Hall of Famers. Let's talk about the Celtics. 9 Hall of Famers, 7 All-Stars. Let's talk about the Bulls of the 90s. 5 Hall of Famers and 4 different All-Stars. And we want to talk about super teams now? We are a little late to this conversation. Oh, because it's the general manager's job to do that and not a player. How dare a player go out there and stir up the pot? Let me tell you what's happening here, because a lot of labor unions discuss this. I was a former player rep, so I saw this infighting as well. What happens here is labor hates labor. So most people that are the audience on Twitter, people at the barbershop, are labor. They're not employers. They're employees. They're not running the show. So what they do is point the finger at another player who's an employee for trying to do something that they should be pointing the finger upstairs about. Here's a case in point. I went to the Chargers' new stadium yesterday, SoFi Stadium. Amazing. And it's funny, you can always hear someone complaining when a player doesn't make a play. Oh, he's overpaid. Oh, this bum. Oh, why you give him that big contract? You hear that all the time, right? But then you see that same person in line, and now you go to the stadium, you got to use your credit card. You can't even bring cash. And they're buying a $743 Bud Light. And they're paying $3,000 for some seats in the 5th tier. And they're sitting there paying $100 in parking. And no one complaining about the billionaire dudes eating more than these millionaire players. It's the same mindset and philosophy. For some reason, when a player does it, when an employee does it, when labor does it, we want all heaven to fall down on them. But when they do it, we just turn a blind eye.
But, Sel, I think it's because a manager's job is to manage, and a player's job is to play.
That's not properly
And
defined.
if the manager was walking on the court shooting hoops, we'd probably look at him kind of differently. When a player starts to act in managerial duties, we look at them a little bit differently, because a player is now stepping out of the boundaries of which he is supposed to operate. We have to define super team. Personally, y'all know me. I like creating a definition that I think makes sense for the sake of speaking in this conversation. When I think about super team, I think of more than 2 non-homegrown stars. Like, I can't classify, and let me look at my dog Slick Rick, let me look at my historian. I can't classify the Spurs as a super team. I want to. I grew up in Dallas, Mavericks fan, Filthy Finley, Dirty Dirk, Nasty Nash. The Spurs kept them from multiple titles. But all the Spurs stars were homegrown. They have 4 future Hall of Famers and a Hall of Fame head coach. That screams super team. But they were all drafted to San Antonio. The Warriors, before KD, I don't classify them as a super team. They had 3 future Hall of Famers, Clay, Steph, Draymond, Hall of Fame head coach. But it wasn't until they started to bring other superstars that I now say super team. Brooklyn Nets, they bring James Harden, they bring Kevin Durant. LeBron James, they weren't a super team when he had AD. But when he had AD and Russell Westbrook, now super team. So I just had to make that clarification or qualification, if you will, so we can get on somewhat of a similar page. LeBron James, he will get knocked for it because, to Slick Rick's point, you'll look around and you'll say, wait a second, Bron went to L.A., he went to Cleveland, he went to Miami, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jordan just stayed in one spot. But LeBron was simply operating in the same economy of the day in which he was playing, and he shouldn't get clowned for it.
Yeah, this is the difficulty for me, and I'm glad you gave us a number of those. You saved me some time, Acho, and the number of teams that don't qualify necessarily as super teams. I don't like that Charles is taking us down this rabbit hole, because the creation of super teams in today's day and age is not the only variable between the eras of Jordan and LeBron. The style of play is completely different. The size of the players is completely different. The salary cap is different. The rules are different. And so taking something like the mechanics of how teams are built creates a variable that, yes, that wasn't the case in Jordan's day and age, in part because of the salary cap, in part because of the mindset. But Marcellus, this idea that if you're going to count Hall of Famers, or you're going to count all NBA selections, the problem is that a number of those players received that acknowledgement or that achievement because they were part of a championship team. They weren't necessarily viewed as Hall of Famers or all NBA players prior to winning a championship, but because of the glow of being part of that success seems to elevate everyone in how we perceive them. They then became Hall of Famers. They were credited with that. I don't know if you took them just as an individual and put them on another team that they would have been looked at in the same light. So I can't quite look at it that way. And then just the number of teams that we look after the fact. I mean, people are now saying the Milwaukee Bucks, in a way, are a super team, or they got a big three because of Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Why? Because they won a championship. The Detroit Pistons with Chauncey Billups and Rasheed Wallace and Ben Wallace, were they a super team? No. The 2006 Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade. We could look at it and we could cobble together names that we consider all-stars or great players and say they had a big three or they were a super team. But by and large, what LeBron James has done in utilizing draft picks and young players and cultivating other players who want to win a ring, that has done more to create super teams than any other element in the game. So credit to him for doing it, and I do believe that he introduced doing it in a different way, but I'm not going to equate that with his excellence, his individual excellence as a player. Michael Jordan was arguably the best defensive player and offensive player in the game for the bulk of his career. That, aside from everything else, is why I would still put him ahead of LeBron James.
Look, fair points, Slick. I'm not here to argue with you because you made some sense there, but I'm also making some sense up here as well, man. I'm pushing back on the crab in the bucket mentality of fans just pushing at LeBron saying, yeah, you created super teams. Meanwhile, every team you've ever rooted for from day one was a super team damn near. Even Charles Barkley understand that. And Charles is my dog, but I'm going to do my job. Man, Chuck's calling it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's the pot calling the kettle dark-skinned it did. And
Chuck started in Philly, went to Phoenix, went to Houston. He went chasing that ring, just like looking for that his own super team. I agree with you 100%.
Man, not even chasing it. Like, he landed in Houston, and we saw that a year removed from winning championships back-to-back, I remind you. He's sitting there with Akeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. We get it. But you were born with Moses Malone, Mo Cheeks, and Julius Erving on your squad, as well as Hall of Famers. Then you go to Phoenix, you got 2 all-star players there as well. So, man, this super team definition, I need to see Acho for this one, because I'm not buying into, well, if it's a homegrown talent, because that's day one. That's looking at KD and Steph's birth certificate, 8 pounds, 11 ounces. Yeah, okay, they homegrown. Look at them now. Like me, I was 8 pounds, 11 ounces. I'm 250 right now. Look at KD and Steph. Not day one. Look at them now. That is a super team. But you want to say since they grew it together, that makes a difference? Hell no, about hook or crook. No matter how you got there, if you have that collaboration of talent, to me, that's super.
I think you got to go, though, back to Slick's point, because I don't think anybody would say that the Oklahoma City Thunder, whatever they were then, when they had KD, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, were a super team. No, but the headline would say that they were a super team. You had KD, Russ, and Harden all on one team. That's a super team. But you got to do your homework. Like, Slick makes a great point. Yeah. We would never have called the Pistons, the 04 Pistons, a super team, ever in life. But retroactively, if you were to look at that squad, yeah, but they had Ben Wallace, they had Chauncey Billups. And just because you play as a superstar for a moment does not mean you're a super team type of individual. It's the same thing with, I have heard the same thing, Slick, in regards to the Bucks. Drew Holiday, maybe the best on-ball defender playing, plus Middleton, who's the real Batman, and the best player in the league, Giannis. They're a super team. They have a big three. Everybody calm down.
Calm down.
Because just 3 months ago, we were saying they ain't even have it. So, Sel,
yes?
I just don't know if I can give you that one.
Well,
because to gauge a super team, you almost have to gauge it beforehand.
Okay.
You can't gauge it retroactively, or everybody would have had a super team.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to judge you. Basically, if I hear super team out of your mouth from you, Slick, anybody out there, I'm judging you. Just like if I see somebody smoking cigarettes or they don't see their kids. You got judge in my head mentally. Just telling you that.